All right, looks like we've got a good group now, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the January 12th steering committee meeting for the Near Southeast Area Plan, the first meeting of 2022. So happy New Year to everyone. Today, we're going to talk about the upcoming engagement. We're calling phase 2, what our plan is for that. Then we're going to talk some about land use in built form and try out some of the activities and exercises we're planning for the upcoming community workshops. And then depending on how long that takes, if we have time, we will then talk about equity in neighborhood plans and implementation tools. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a reminder of where we are in the process. We are now into phase 2, which is define the issues and develop initial recommendations. So the first phase that we did in the second half of 2021 was understanding the area. We heard from the community what they like, what they don't like, what they want to see changed. We're taking that, the vision statements you've helped us develop and the preliminary direction you've helped us develop to shape the questions we're asking in this second round, phase 2, where we're going to try to really drill down into what the issues are and start to develop those recommendations that will go into the plan. Coming out of this, we will create draft recommendations. In the next phase, we will share those draft recommendations with the community, get feedback on them, refine them, improve them. And then those will go into the draft plan in phase 4, which we'll again share with the community, get feedback on, improve before it goes into the final phase where it's adopted by planning board and city council. So our goals for phase 2 are to confirm the vision statements that we've drafted, again, with your help. So share those with the community, make sure the community thinks those represent their vision for Near Southeast in 2040. Develop those initial recommendations for the issues and opportunities that we've identified. Some of those issues will, instead of going straight to a draft recommendation, there may be a few options we want to evaluate. So for some of the bigger ones like growth strategy or missing middle housing options or things like that, we may develop a few alternatives that we'll test out. And in phase 3, we'll share those alternatives with the community and they will help us choose a preferred alternative. We also want to start identifying focus areas and transformative projects. So the plan will identify some specific areas that we really want to focus on, provide additional guidance for and recommendations for. So, so far we know Evans is going to be one of these focus areas. That's something we've heard a lot about, but there may be others that we want to focus a little more on in the plan. And then transformative projects are sort of specific recommendations that we think can really make a big difference in the community, that if we can make these few things happen, they can really help transform and improve the area. So we're going to start identifying what those potentially could be. Also in the plan, each neighborhood will have its own section. So we want to start getting into neighborhood specific issues. In the first phase, it was really area wide, high level, general discussion type things. Now we want to start getting into what's the difference between what's happening in Washington, Virginia Vale versus what's happening in Goldsmith, so we can make those specific recommendations. So some of our questions will be sort of neighborhood specific. And then throughout all of this, we want to be clear about how the information we gathered in the first phase has informed what we are asking now and why we're asking these questions, and then what we will do with what we're gathering in phase 2, how that will inform phase 3 and the rest of the process and ultimately the plan. So make sure that that sort of overall story of the planning process is clear throughout, so people can see how their input in phase 1 is being used now and how their input now will be used in the future. So to accomplish that, we're going to do a few different things similar to how we did things in phase 1. The big one will be an online survey, or actually we're going to break it up into a few surveys by topic so that they're not overwhelming. We're going to be asking a lot of questions. So we don't want one really long survey. We want to break it up. So there's a few surveys that people can take. If they're only interested in 1 or 2 topics, they don't have to do all of them. We certainly encourage everyone to do all of them, but they can break it up over time as well. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. We'll also be doing community workshops virtually. I'll talk about those a little more in a minute as well. We'll be doing similar to what we did in phase one, some pop-up or in-person events. We're still figuring out what those will be. Obviously, with the COVID situation right now and it being winter, our options may be a little more limited than they were in the fall or late summer when we started. So we're trying to come up with safe but effective things that we can do around those. We will also be conducting focus groups as part of this round of engagement. So some of these issues that we've identified that the community has told us about are really technical or have technical aspects to them that it would be difficult to ask the community about in an online survey. We want to sort of get into depth on some of these. So for some of these topics, we'll be convening focus groups that will have members of the public participate. Members of the steering committee can also participate, but we'll be bringing in some topic experts or some stakeholders that really know and have an interest in these subjects to dive into some of these details and help us develop appropriate recommendations around those. So we'll be doing those as well. We'll also be continuing our focused engagement, and that's where we are aiming engagement at groups and constituencies that have not participated as much in the planning process traditionally or in this planning process so far. So as we've talked about previously, we tracked who we heard from in phase one. We know where the gaps are. So we're going to continue to work on that. And community navigators, which I'll get into in just a second as well. So I mentioned the online surveys broken up by topic. So again, there'll be 4 surveys, one around each of the main topics that the plan is organized around. And again, it's based on the issues that were identified through phase one. So some of the issues have really risen to the top as the most important or the most complex. So those will get a deeper dive in these online surveys. We'll ask multiple questions about them. Other topics that we heard from the community about, but maybe not as much or maybe aren't as complicated, we'll still get a question or two, but not as deep a dive. And we're going to use sort of a variety of question types to get at these issues. So some of them will be sort of simple multiple choice questions. What's your priority ranking questions? Some will be open-ended, but we'll also use things like what we call a visual preference survey, where we'll provide a series of photographs of, say, how Evans Corridor could redevelop, what it could look like in the future. And people can tell us which ones they think are most appropriate or most desirable versus the ones they wouldn't like to see. And that'll help us get to some of these more vision questions for like how Evans could redevelop. And then, like I mentioned, we want to get to some neighborhood specific things. So some of these we'll be asking, specifically in your neighborhood. We'll keep track of what neighborhood respondents are from. So we can say the folks from Virginia Village want this, whereas the folks from Indian Creek want this. And that'll help us get to those neighborhood specific issues. Focused engagement and community navigators. I talked about the focused engagement, getting to the folks who are underrepresented and we didn't hear from in phase one. Now that we have our consultant team on board, we really think we can make progress on getting to those groups, which, as we've talked about, are mostly renters, or the ones we didn't hear from, also lower income folks and people of color. So we'll be developing specific strategies for reaching those groups. And then community navigators are members of the community that we will partner with, and they'll actually be paid positions. We'll pay them a small stipend to work with us throughout the rest of the planning process. And we want folks from sort of specific constituencies throughout the community that will help us serve as liaisons. So they'll take what we're asking, what we're trying to accomplish, go to these constituencies, work with them to get responses, bring that back, bring any issues or things we need to be aware of from those communities back to us. So we're looking at things like faith-based organizations, immigrant and refugee communities, communities of color, renters, seniors, small business owners, youth and students are all potential constituencies that we want to find community navigators for. So we are working on identifying who those folks can be or who the groups we want to reach out to find folks are, who they are to work with. But if anyone has ideas for who you think would be a good community navigator, who you think would be a good community navigator that we should reach out to, or any specific groups that you think, even if you don't know a specific person, but if you know that this group is somebody we should be working with in this, let us know. So I'll pause for a second if anyone has anybody off the top of their head. Otherwise, if you think of anyone shortly, send me an email and let me know.
There's one group in Virginia Village. They're called the Love Project. They tend to work with some of the underrepresented communities, especially through Ellis Elementary.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
And that's Love with 2 V's.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, I can try and find you a contact and I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a contact for the Love Project. This is Nancy. So I can help with that.
Thanks, Nancy. Any other ideas similar to the Love Project? That's a great suggestion. All right, like I said, if you think of anyone, please give this some thought over the next week or so. We want to start getting these folks recruited and on board here soon. The idea is to launch this round of engagement in sort of late February. So that's sort of our time frame for trying to get this set up. So if you think of anyone or any groups over the next week or so, please send those to us. We really appreciate it. And then, as I mentioned, another aspect of this engagement will be community workshops. Right now, we're thinking breaking up the workshops by topic. So we're actually looking at doing 2 workshops about a week apart, but on different days of the week. So if folks can't do a Wednesday one week, they can do the Thursday the next, or whatever they end up being. Again, broken up by topic. So we're thinking the first one around sort of land use development and housing, and then the second one around mobility and quality of life infrastructure. The idea is for each of these, we'll give a brief introduction to the plan for those folks who didn't participate in phase 1, or even if they did, it's been 6 months now, they may have forgotten what the plan was about. So just a quick reintroduction to the plan, recap phase 1, what we did, and more importantly, what we heard from the community in phase 1. That's the vision and issues and opportunities. So go over what we've taken out of the phase 1 engagement, give folks an opportunity to comment on those vision statements. Again, we want to make sure that those are representative of the community's desires. Then give a quick overview of what we're doing in phase 2, what the goals are, and how folks can participate besides these community workshops that they're attending at the time, the other opportunities that they'll have. And then break out into groups by neighborhood. So we'll start the discussion around specific topics, but we want to do breakout groups by neighborhood, again, to get into those neighborhood specific issues. And we'll do some activities to get into some of these issues. And what we're going to do here in a minute is test out some of these activities with you all. So you're all going to be a bit of guinea pigs here, but we also do want to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. So sort of 2 birds with 1 stone here, getting you to test them and to also gather this input from you. So that'll be the majority of the workshop will be in these breakout sessions, but we'll be discussing these issues that, again, we've identified through the first phase of engagement that we need input on. So before we get into that, though, any questions, comments, suggestions on the proposal for the phase 2 engagement? Okay, I'm taking silence as a good thing. Everybody thinks this is a great plan. If you have any concerns or any suggestions for other things we should be thinking about or looking at, again, please let us know. Put it in the chat. You can send me an email. Bring it up later. We want your all input on this as well. But if no one has any comments right now, we can move on to the activities. Okay. So what we're going to do is, for those of you who participated in the Kickoff Workshop back in July last year, we used a service called Mentimeter. We're going to use that again to help sort of guide the discussion. So give me just a minute while I switch screens here. All right, so if everyone can go to take their phone or open up a new tab in your browser on your computer and go to menti.com, menti.com. Should just bring up a little box where you can enter this code. Our code is 29764832. So if you go to menti.com and enter that code, it should connect you to this. So give everyone a minute. So the idea is we're going to ask a few sort of multiple choice or ranking questions, and then use that as a foundation for discussion around these topics. So it'll be question, discussion, question, discussion. So that's what we'll be working on here. All right, anyone having any issues getting to this?
Nope.
Okay, is everyone connected? We're good to go? Okay, see a thumbs up from Jared. That's good. All right, let's give this a try. So the first topic we want to ask about is growth and community benefits. So for all these, we want to start off with, again, what we heard in phase one, what the community told us and why we're asking this question. So in phase one, we heard from the community that, well, we know that every part of the city needs to accommodate growth. That's dictated by Blueprint Denver. But what we heard specifically for Near Southeast is that we want to grow sustainably and we want to direct growth to appropriate places while limiting impacts on the existing community, ensuring that the community benefits from investment in the area. So to understand how we can do that, we want to ask how we should direct growth in the area and how to address trade-offs and what kind of community benefits the Near Southeast community would like to see. Again, as part of directing growth, we can extract some community benefits from development, from investment. So what should we be prioritizing in those community benefits? So the first question is around those community benefits. If we're going to start getting community benefits in exchange for growth in certain areas, what is most important to the community? So we have a few options of what we could try to get in exchange for new development, like affordable housing, housing for particular groups like seniors or families or people with disabilities, better design of new development, increased setbacks, so bringing things further from the street, more landscaped area between buildings and the street, improved landscaping, more open space as part of development. They would have to dedicate a part of their property as publicly accessible open space. Preservation is reusing or preserving some important buildings, getting community serving uses like daycare or other community space nonprofit space, things like that. Or if anyone has any other ideas, you're not seeing on this list that you think we should really be focusing on, you can select other as well. And you get to select up to 3 on this as well. So use all your choices here to tell us your top 3. Okay. Looks like we're getting some good response here. Sure, how many folks we have. Looks like we've got about 11 responses. And the most common response was affordable housing, which is not surprising, and improved design. And then enhanced landscaping is coming in third, with publicly accessible open space right behind it. So like I said, the idea is to then sort of have some discussion around this. So let's start with the most common response, affordable housing. Folks said that's important. What types of, or I should say, we know we have certain targets. We have our affordable housing goals from our housing and stability department, but different communities or different parts of town have different needs. So do folks have specific ideas for what types of affordable housing they would like to see, as in what groups we should be aiming this at lower income folks currently experiencing homelessness, families, do we want affordable for sale housing? Any ideas around what the more specific needs around affordable housing, or any other thoughts about affordable housing anyone wants to share?
I'll start if you don't mind, Scott. This is
Go ahead.
Jenny. I think we need missing middle. I feel like this part of town near Southeast has mostly been middle class or lower middle class, and as I'm seeing building in my neighborhood, University Hills North, it's mostly there's a lot of apartments going up, and that's not meeting the needs that people have to purchase homes, and the home prices in this neighborhood are skyrocketing. So I think we have a need for missing middle, townhomes, paired homes, duplexes, condos, and also low-income housing. We have great transportation hubs in the near Southeast. We have great access to all of Denver, and low-income housing would benefit from those accesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have a question specifically about missing middle housing coming up, so we can get into that a bit more, but that's all great input. Anyone else have a response to Jenny's comments, or any other thoughts around what you'd like to see in terms of affordable housing?
Hey, I'm just going to second what Jenny said. I do feel that there is a lack of the ownership element in affordable housing. Generally, even when you just talk about affordable housing, it almost always means apartments, non-owner occupied type dwelling, and you really you need a connection to the neighborhood, and I think a lot of people who are priced out would love to have that connection to neighborhood and community, and sometimes it's just not as achievable in apartment or But for that said, some rental townhome communities that are affordable, so that more families can live more comfortably. Most of this product in the neighborhood, even if it's not in Denver, it's in Arapahoe County, is up on the higher price point for families.
Great. Anyone else? Thanks, Lisa.
I think kind of piggybacking off of Jenny's comments around transportation, thinking about housing and transportation costs combined, and trying to leverage the opportunities where we do have good transportation to help reduce overall costs of living.
Yeah, great point. All right. Let's move on to approved design. So 7 folks selected that as an option. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but what issues do you have with current design, or what do you have in mind when you say improved design? What would you like buildings in your southeast to look like that is an improvement in your mind? Scott, go ahead.
So I'm thinking of some current projects along Leedsdale, which I think is kind of representative of some of the issues that exist along Evans that we've talked about, and some of the other major corridors where sidewalks are subpar where they do exist. Have brought in new features like tree lawns and larger sidewalks that are set back from the street that are a lot more comfortable. And I think those types of improvements are sorely needed in a lot of the near southeast.
Okay, great. Councilwoman Black.
Hi, I chose that improved design because in particular, in my district, the University Hills North neighborhood, which is just south of the Colorado Station, has had an incredible amount of new development, and a lot of it doesn't have any rhyme or reason to the design. And I know that everyone will agree that the Deco Apartments is probably the ugliest new building in all of the city and county of Denver. And we need to put a stop to that. And we need to have some kind of plan. I know the University Hills North neighborhood, with my help, we engaged Stantec Architecture to do sort of a little mini neighborhood plan, how buildings would scale down and have some aesthetic design. And I think we really need to pay attention to that, because I do think it's appropriate that we add density to that area, but there needs to be some kind of planning for it, and it needs to have some aesthetic value.
Yeah, great. So, I've heard a lot about the Deco. That's one that comes up often when folks say they don't like new buildings in the area. Can you, Councilwoman, or someone articulate specifically what it is about the Deco that you don't like?
Oh, I would be happy to. So to quote my friend Jenny Newhofen from the University Hills North neighborhood, who was on this meeting, she said, "We've been fooled by pretty pictures before." So the developer came to all of us and showed us pretty pictures of, high quality building materials and, a nice 4-story apartment. But what we got, it's like they forgot to finish it. It is very low quality finishing. It looks like they forgot to put the brick on. All the balconies, some of them are look like they're like reclaimed wood, trying to be rustic, but other ones are white painted wrought iron. And the building doesn't even have a kind of a cohesive shape. It's like the shape of it was based on the lots they could purchase. I mean, it's really horrendous. And I just, as a city, we can't ever let that happen again. So I guess it's the quality of the building materials, as well as, building up to the very edge of the permissible area that they could build to without saying, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have some grass here? And, oh yeah, someone just commented, it's like, there's no landscaping. There's just nothing to engage you. It's just, I just want somebody to develop on that corner at Colorado and Evans so we don't have to see the deco anymore. And they built it around the Crown Burger because they couldn't buy that piece of property. And then they built it around a car wash because they couldn't develop that piece. It's just like everything that everyone thinks is bad about, a certain kind of developers, that's what we got there. And nobody wants that anywhere in Denver.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. So it sounds like sort of lack of cohesive design thought, lack of detail in the design and the construction, poor quality materials, and then just sort of the bulk and the relationship to the street and the sidewalk and lack of landscaping is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and with no regard to the community, right? It's like they don't care about Denver. There are developers who care about city building and building a great city. Those guys did not. They came in to make a buck. And we don't want that in the near southeast area plan or anywhere in Denver.
Right. Okay, thank you. Scott Caldwell, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would echo a lot of what Councilwoman Black stated, but at Colorado Center, as an example, our design of what we tried to build there really takes into account a lot of these categories. I think improved design can mean enhanced landscaping, better connectivity, thought about pedestrian access and how they're getting to and from. So it touches a lot of these categories. And so to me, that's the important thing about improved design. I think architectural materials you use are important, but equally important are some of the other things. That's how's it going to benefit the community? How are people going to get to and from? If you're really developing around a transit station, give thought to some of those aspects too. So I think we took a lot of care in that regard. I think just as a development perspective, new construction in the neighborhood, which is needed. I think there's a lot of new construction that's needed, but it needs to take into account a lot of those factors.
Okay, great, thank you. Harvey.
Well, I think we've hit most of the items. I was just going to second the opinion of the new retirement facility, your senior facility at Holly and Leetsdale on the old Robinson lot. Excuse me. It's built right up to the sidewalk. You're going to be having icing problems all along Leetsdale as outside that building. It blocks the sun. It doesn't give a view of the building. It's not pretty. Landscaping, again, it could have been set back. I don't know why these things get approved, but I agree that those types of things need to look at, especially now that the Kmart development's going to be occurring. I saw preliminary drawings of Kmart probably a year ago, and it's not pretty. So I think something such as that could be a showcase of what we really want in the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks, Harvey. Jared.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as somebody who actually saw the drawings of the retirement community, the Hilltop Reserve there at Leetsdale and Holly, the real thing obviously doesn't quite look like the photos. The images had a lot more of a sense of a setback off of Leetsdale. So, even the best drawings, if they're not trying to be malicious in intent, sometimes it's hard to figure out what that's going to feel like in real life. But I would agree, especially with Councilwoman Black's comments. I think you can have a sense of the one thing I'm for, at least the Hilltop Reserve. They're local people trying to provide housing for seniors. So I think that there's a lot of good things about Hilltop Reserve. There's just a few things that it's like, well, that could have been done a little bit better. But I kind of feel like you want to celebrate the wins and try to learn from the losses along the way.
Thanks. Spencer.
Yeah, just going back to that apartment complex over on Colorado and Evans. Really, I mean, if you've been in Rhino, every apartment complex in Rhino looks like that one. It just kind of doesn't fit the neighborhood down here. It definitely feels more suited for like the Rhino neighborhood where it's a lot more dense, less green space, everything like that. I'm talking, yeah. And then I was also going to say, I kind of appreciate what the senior center did, at least in the fact that they added that extra turn lane right there at Holly. That's been very beneficial, and it was nice that they considered that, just in regard to improving traffic flow in that area too. I don't know if that was them or the city that went through that, but it was a nice addition. And lastly, one thing that I have liked that I've seen in some of the development in the area is that new apartment complex going in at 25 in Evans. I kind of like how they kept the old hotel sign. I think it's still there, and kind of that inclusion of what the neighborhood used to be and used to look like is a nice little, like, I guess, tip of the hat and a recognition to, what used to be there. And, it just kind of adds a nice little flair, something that says, hey, this is what we came from. Here's where we are now. Just kind of my take.
Great, thanks. I think unfortunately that Cameron Motel.
They took it down.
Well, I
took
don't
it
know
down?
it's gone yet, but I think the plan is to eventually take it down.
Got my hopes up.
But yeah, that's definitely something we can, and that was one of the options here is historic preservation, trying to encourage folks to keep buildings. That was, our landmark team looked at the old Cameron Motel and determined there wasn't enough there to land.
Yeah, I mean,
but there are other options that we can encourage.
I'm not saying like we need to keep Milo's sign or something when it gets torn down, but just some of the other stuff.
Yeah, no, great point. All right, any other thoughts on design? Okay, let's move on to landscaping. We're going to lump landscaping and open space in together. Those were the next two, and they're pretty close. So folks who selected one of those, again, what do you have in mind? What type of landscaping would you like to see, or what don't you like that you've seen in the area? And what types of open space would you like to see associated with new development? Do you want plazas? Do you want park, green space? Do you just want more trees? Any thoughts around those? Spencer, you put your hand up again, or is it just still up from?
Yeah, I put it up again.
Great, go ahead.
I'm going to reiterate it again. Dog park area needs a dog park, and I would say also for the landscaping aspect, just appropriate vegetation for the Front Ranges environment. We have a very unique climate here. We have a very unique just vegetation needs. So I think that needs to be considered in whatever happens.
Okay, great. Lisa.
So, I live near a kind of a pocket park, the City of Chennai Park, and I do find that when the city has come in to do landscaping, I don't even know where they find some of these pencil trees, but it's going to take a long time. And so noticeable even along the High Line. I appreciate the planting, of the trees along the High Line, but they're in cages and they're very small. And so I kind of wonder like how many of them are even going to make it. And so when I thought about enhanced landscaping, I thought about more of publicly financed landscaping and can we get something that's a little bit bigger.
Great, thanks. Councilwoman.
Did you say Councilwoman Black?
I did, yes, go ahead.
Oh, Lisa, I just wanted to comment on the trees. So when you plant more mature trees, they are less likely to survive. Smaller trees in, I think, 5 or 7 years will become larger than if you plant a large tree because of the root system. And so it really makes more sense to plant smaller trees. But they do plan on a certain percentage of them dying because, trees are not indigenous to this part of Colorado, except for the cottonwoods that grow along water. And so the trees they have planted on the Highline are being watered. But we will for sure use them. But for landscaping, I also go back to the increased setbacks, and we really need to enforce our sidewalk standards with the separated sidewalks. A landscaped tree lawn is such a more pleasant way to walk. And that little bit of landscaping is so important to combating climate change because those trees eat the carbon. So I think we need to focus on having that standard, that sidewalk standard, and enforcing it.
Okay, great, thank you. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I agree with, especially with what I heard Spencer saying, that we really need to be attentive in our plantings, that they be climate ready. And as far as City of Chennai goes, the head of the botanics at the Botanic Gardens, Dr. Sarada Krishnan, is from Chennai, India, and has offered to partner with Parks and Rec to design some gardens for the City of Chennai Park that would be reminiscent of India, but would use plants specifically tolerant for our climate. So I think we need to take advantage of all the resources we have out there to make sure we green up the near southeast neighborhoods as best we can.
Yeah, great. That'd be cool if we could get an India style garden in the City of Chennai Park. I like that idea. Kathy.
Yeah, just really quick. I was having trouble raising my hand before, but I think with the enhanced landscaping, publicly accessible open space, community serving uses, increased setbacks, that all kind of rolls into the same idea that Councilwoman Black and Councilwoman Cashman was just talking about. And I think one of the best examples I've seen in Denver, in our central Denver part, is the old university, Colorado, I call it Colorado General because my dad taught there, but redevelopment, where on the Colorado Boulevard side, all you see are blocks and blocks of apartments. But if you go to the interior, it's a real neighborhood feel. And when you walk out of those apartments by Hale Parkway and 8th Avenue, it just feels really neighborhoodly. So I think that can apply to the near southeast neighborhoods with Evans in Colorado and the Goldsmith area and Virginia Village and the CDOT redevelopment, property redevelopment also. So I just think it's a great example of feeling like you're in a neighborhood with density.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kathy. All right. Now, we had a few other options here that folks selected, so I don't necessarily want to go through them one by one, but if anyone had anything about one of these other options that we haven't talked about yet that they want to bring up, or I'm curious, somebody selected other, if they want to share what they were thinking for the other option.
I'm going to say tonight. Did it sound coherent?
That's a good idea.
What?
Councilwoman Black, you have your hand up. Is that a new comment? No. Okay. So anyone want to share anything about community serving uses, setbacks, housing for other groups, preservation, or other? Jared, go ahead.
Yeah, I disrupted in the chat, but I think the setbacks has been mentioned before, but it's specifically in regards to if we're hoping to move people to pedestrian, rolling, or walking. Nobody's going to do that on the streets that currently exist in the neighborhood. Like, we're going to have to create space for that, and it seems to be the most protected way to do that is off of increased setbacks.
Yep. Anyone else? Okay. It was a great discussion. Thanks everyone for responding to the survey question and having some good discussion there. Let's move on to the next question. So this one, thinking about how we want to direct growth in near Southeast. So there are a few different ways we could try to organize growth. So we'd like you to sort of rank which ones you think would be most appropriate. So the first option is really concentrating everything around where we already have the most density. So Colorado Center is the most obvious place. But pick out a few places like that where they say, all right, all the growth is going to concentrate there. The second option is having a few more places. So places like Colorado Center and Yale, but also some major intersections like Colorado and Evans. Well, that's near Colorado Station, at Monaco and Evans, at Leedsdale and Quebec. So pick out a few locations around the area to concentrate growth. Third would be to spread it a little more evenly. So pick out more smaller intersections, including maybe some of the local centers within the neighborhoods to take more of the growth. Fourth is more evenly distributed along the major streets. So all along Colorado, all along Evans, all along Leedsdale, we would see more growth, but less overall, height at any individual location, but more growth everywhere. And then the fifth option is have more of it in the neighborhood. So not relying as much on the centers and corridors, but really spread evenly throughout all of near Southeast, including the neighborhoods within the neighborhoods. If anyone has any questions about that, when we put this into the survey, we're going to have some graphics that help illustrate these, but we don't have those ready yet. So I'm just trying to describe them to you as best I can. So if anyone has any questions they want to ask before they enter their response, let me know. Looks like responses are coming in. Still got a few more folks, looks like, who haven't finalized their choices yet. All right, I think that's everyone. So it looks like the first choice based on everyone's responses was at a few major intersections. So places like Colorado Evans, Monaco and Evans, Leedsdale, Quebec, things like that. So, oh, got one more. Great. So for folks who ranked that highly, or for folks who rank that towards the bottom, what do you like about that option? What or dislike about it? What makes you think that would be a good way to organize growth in your Southeast? Anyone? So the idea there is at these intersections we'd see greater development intensity, potentially more height, but we'd also be able to get these community benefits focused at these locations. They'd be locations that would be better served by transit, but also be creating these sort of more urban nodes or hubs around the community. Councilman Cashman.
Yes, Scott. I mean, for me, pretty much everything we're doing here are many elements of the planning process. I go back to the earlier discussions about creating place. And so, that to me, this gives us an opportunity to spread that through the district.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Yeah, these will give us opportunities to create these places around near Southeast that can really serve the community.
Yeah, I mean, I don't just think of, large rectangular apartment complexes. I think of a broad-ranging developments addressing a number of the needs that the task force, the steering committee has identified.
Yeah, right, exactly. Christopher.
I think also this helps keep the traffic where it's meant to be, and cars where they're supposed to be, and people are able to ride the bus and other modes. So as you're getting your density closer to those busier intersections and streets, I think it just enables that ability to keep it out of the neighborhood.
Yep, good point. Scott.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest the same thing that Christopher just said. Just, spreading out. I think a lot of this has to do with spreading out the traffic, creating amenities at different central corridors there. And again, it's just about spreading things out and not forcing traffic into certain areas, but creating places that are appropriately spaced out.
Yeah, makes sense. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks. One option that isn't on here is just having growth on the major corridors themselves, not just the intersections. But I've always felt like, Colorado Boulevard is the place for density. And, there are low density neighborhoods a block or 2 blocks off Colorado Boulevard, but the appropriate place to put the density is on Colorado Boulevard, where we have buses and we have Colorado Station.
I'm just paranoid.
And in my district, we have some actually old higher rise residential projects that everyone is used to by now, but I just feel like that's appropriate. So that wasn't one of the options. So I just kind of want to clarify that just along those major commercial corridors.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at with what ended up as number 3 here, distributed evenly along corridors and in the centers. So sort of spread out along Colorado, along Evans.
Yes, I like that, but not necessarily at those more
Right.
internal centers like Florida and Holly.
Okay, right. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, we'll make this option clearer. Like I said, we'll get more detail on these for the actual survey. But yeah, good point. Harvey.
I don't understand the popularity of the first option of adding development at intersections that are already at capacity. I don't know why that would be so attractive. So maybe someone can clear it up for me.
So which one of these did you rank highest, Harvey?
I like distributing among set corridors and centers.
Okay. So get it more spread out instead of concentrated.
Yeah, rather than in an already congested area.
Yeah. Jared, did you want to respond to that or add something else?
Yeah, I was probably just going to echo the same thing that I think Councilman Black said. The question about putting high density on major boulevards and avenues and thoroughfares, not just at the intersections. So I'm probably somewhere in between that and Harvey. Like, I don't know that we need to cram everything at the intersection, but I do think the larger streets can handle, like Leedsdale still has a considerable amount of undeveloped area that would seem to be more appropriate than throwing up a very large apartment building on a street like Holly, which is just not built for it. So maybe somewhere in between those two.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, we're going to ask this question or some version of this question to the public. This is one of the ones where we'll probably develop some alternatives. So it'll probably be some hybrid of these options that will be alternatives that we'll share with the community in the next round. And then the final preferred alternative will probably be some hybrid of those alternatives. So, we have them sort of try to be clearly delineated in this question, but the ultimate recommendation will likely be some mix of these things. So these comments around, I like a bit of this and a bit of this are all great comments and helpful in helping us craft the ultimate recommendation. All right. Anyone else who doesn't like focused at centers and corridors or selected one of the lower down ones as their top choice want to present a counter argument or asking questions like Harvey did? Lisa.
I don't know how I got two hands. I actually picked the fourth alternative to concentrate some growth at our major centers, and mostly just because it's a TOD site, and I feel that TOD sites should be dense. And Colorado Station is mostly parking lot, and I think there's a lot of parking lot, and I think that the area around there could be denser. I'm not saying incredibly dense, but I think there's some opportunities there to get people completely off the car trip.
Okay, great, thanks. Jenny.
I just keep reading the fifth option down there. I don't know if anyone chose it. Less growth in centers and corridors and more within neighborhoods. You know, I'm just trying to picture that. And I grew up more in Capitol Hill, Congress Park, and that's what they see more there, I feel. And I loved the diversity that was up there, that's up more in the center part of Denver. I don't think that that's what we are in Southeast Denver. But I think it's more inclusive. So I'm just wondering if anyone actually picked that as their number one or number two, if they had any more insight on that one.
Yeah. Good
Maybe
question. Not. Christopher, you have your hand up. Is that a new comment or is that just?
Oh, sorry, that's just stuck up there. That's my bad.
No problem. Erika.
So I was one of the ones who picked the fifth response. I think as I heard you guys speaking, though, I think I might have had a different idea and kind of more what Jenny was just saying. That's kind of what I pictured, some like little things interspersed within neighborhoods that would make neighborhoods a little bit more walkable, have just little neighborhood centers. I wasn't thinking high density, large buildings. So I might have been kind of thinking of that in the wrong way when I answered that way. But I had more of the kind of, I don't think near Southeast Denver will ever be Capitol Hill or Congress Park, but I do think that aiming towards getting a little bit more of that walkability is really important for our area. So that's kind of why I answered in that way.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly valid. I don't think you were misunderstanding anything. That's a valid response. And you know, as we talked about a little bit at the beginning, I don't know if Erika, you caught that around the missing middle comment that Jenny made on the first question. We're going to talk a little bit more about missing middle in one of the later questions. But yeah, that's sort of the idea. 5 is rely more on that sort of missing middle into the existing neighborhoods to increase density. We're going to see some of that. That's again our direction out of our citywide plans, but we could rely on that more to accommodate growth versus directing it to the centers or the corridors. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that. One of the advantages being that you could potentially support more other uses within those communities with that greater density within the communities, or some folks may see that as a disadvantage if they don't want those kind of uses in their community. So yeah, Erika and Jenny, good points around that one as well. Jared, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I think it's mostly a question of clarification. Like when you start talking about growth within neighborhoods and you're primarily working in single family home neighborhoods, are you talking primarily about ADU? Are you talking about encouraging kind of scrape old home, build duplex, like the one that we walked past on Holly, like it was 2 homes scraped, put in 4. I guess the question is, what scale are you talking about when you're talking about growth in neighborhood? The ideas of like townhomes, row homes is a different sort of conversation. So just maybe clarification when that question gets put out, to what level of density are you talking about of growth in a neighborhood?
Yeah, and that's going to be this question that I keep teasing is what kind of missing middle housing do you think is appropriate for your neighborhood? Is that duplexes? Is it townhomes? Is it small apartment buildings? So that's the and that could be preserving the existing house and adding on to it, or creating new units behind it, or it could be totally scraping existing houses and replacing that with something new. There are different ways that could look, and we want to hear from the community on what they think is appropriate. But again, if we lean towards number 5, if that's what the community is telling us, it's going to be the more intense versions of that, right? To accommodate this growth within the neighborhood, it's not just going to be ADUs. It's not just going to be a few duplexes. We're going to have to start seeing things like townhomes and even some small apartment buildings to accommodate that. Whereas if we concentrate more growth in the centers and corridors, that means less reliance on this missing middle housing within the neighborhoods. We'll still see some duplexes and ADUs and things like that, but maybe fewer of the more intense options. So yeah, you're absolutely right. These questions are all interrelated, and we're trying to break them down so that they're easy to answer. But yeah, it is a lot of, well, depending on what we do here, my answer on this one may change. So that's a good point. Spencer, I think you had your hand up. Did you take it down?
Yeah, I took it down, but I mean, for the most part, I'm in agreement in that regard. It's, just needs a little more clarification so people kind of understand what you're meaning by growth in those specific corridors and things like that.
Yeah.
Because for me, I live basically Florida and Holly. So for me, I'm trying to envision what kind of growth and development would look like on that little corner. And it's kind of hard to see that as like the number 2 option here when there's really not much that I feel like could really go into that area. I mean, you've got a school on one corner, you've got a gas station on 2 of them, and you got a little shopping center. I mean, so just kind of curious, like what that would entail for that corner, because I mean, Holly and Florida are already pretty bad as it is with traffic.
Yeah, right. If we did want to concentrate more growth at some place like Florida and Holly, it would entail, redevelopment of at least part of that shopping center with multi-story mixed-use buildings with structured parking, likely, right? We could put in a 3-story building with podium parking. As a developer, we could allow someone to put in that kind of development. So that's what that would potentially look like.
So would that involve basically buying out all the current tenants and scraping and building on top, or?
Yeah, right. Potentially that would be.
Okay.
And again, it wouldn't be the city doing it, but a developer or the property owner could decide they want to redevelop. If we allow greater intensity there, right? They may say, all right, this shopping center does okay, but if now we have the opportunity to build a 5-story building here, it makes sense for us to redevelop it and put something more intense in there.
Yeah, because I actually put that option a little lower just because in my mind I couldn't envision it having lived in basically the backyard of that shopping center.
Right. Yeah, right. That's what we want to hear from folks is, do you think that's an appropriate place for that type of growth? So
thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Unless anyone has any last minute comments on this one, let's move on. So this is great discussion on this one. Thanks, everyone. All right, now looking at Evans Corridor. So you have all told us that this is very important for the community in how we develop the Evans Corridor, how the Evans Corridor changes over the next 20 years. So folks are concerned with the design of the buildings, the uses in those buildings, the appearance of the street itself, maintenance and upkeep, how folks are traveling along the corridor. All of those folks want to see improved. They're not really consistent with the community's vision. So this gives us an opportunity to really create a corridor that serves the community's needs and creates an identity, this sense of place that Councilman Cashman was talking about earlier. So we want to understand what folks are really envisioning for Evans Avenue and what types of priorities there are for achieving that. For the folks who joined us at the walking tour on Saturday, we had a bit of discussion about this, about how it's really a long-term change. We're not going to come in and totally redevelop Evans Corridor in the next few years. We want to set the vision, set the goals so that over the next 20 years or even longer, as private development occurs, as the city reinvests in the area, we can achieve this vision. So we want to understand what folks' long-term ideal vision is. So there are a few different ideas of sort of what this area could look like. Again, when we ask the community this, these will be accompanied by pictures showing off sort of what that looks like, so people can see examples of what this is, but we haven't been able to find those pictures yet, so I'm just going to try to describe them to you. So this is another ranking question. Rank what your ideal vision for the Evans Corridor is among these four options. So the first one is still fairly suburban and lower scale, sort of up to 3 stories. Buildings are still separated, there's still individual buildings with each with their own parking lots. So it's still suburban, but it's improved design, improved mobility. It's the ideal version of a suburban corridor. The next is sort of in between that and an urban corridor. So maybe a little taller buildings, maybe some buildings with connected shop fronts with parking behind them or structured parking, but also still some freestanding buildings with individual parking lots. A mixture of sort of soft landscape and hard landscape, sort of bridging that suburban design feel. The next one is sort of a low scale urban, so it'll feel more urban, more continuous street wall of buildings, landscaping mostly in tree wells, so graded tree wells in the sidewalk instead of larger green space. Taller buildings up to 5 stories. And then the fourth option would be sort of higher scale, mid-scale urban, similar design, again, mostly connected buildings, continuous street wall, hardscape landscaping, but potentially up to 8 stories. So again, try to picture those in your mind. Eventually we will have pictures to go with them. But hopefully my description is evocative enough. Councilwoman Black.
I just wanted to add that we do have some 8-story zoning along Evans. And whatever it is the community desires, I think everyone wants it to step down into the residential neighborhood. So I think it's important to say that we want it to have some kind of step down.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, it looks like the sort of low scale urban option is rising to the top with semi-urban in second place. Councilman Cashman.
Yes, sir. I think, and I don't really know how this would be incorporated. Councilwoman Black and I have both been asking for several years for a formal in-depth study of Evans. And I would like to see that come as a recommendation in this plan.
Yes, absolutely.
To half-step that, I think would be a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like I said, this is a long-term vision and redevelopment or reimagining of the corridor. So yeah, absolutely. One of the first steps would be more in-depth study, a next step study of the corridor and how we can achieve this and resolve other issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's so complex to just lightly address this. I just don't think works. And to take this planning initiative without a real insistence that this corridor get the attention it deserves, again, I think it'd be disastrous, actually, not just a missed opportunity.
Okay, thanks. All right. Anyone want to talk about why they ranked things the way they did? Anyone who had low scale urban at the top of their list want to describe their thinking? Scott.
Yeah, I thought those comments were really interesting because I was struggling to answer this question. I think it has a lot to do with what Councilwoman Black said as well about stepping down. And so kind of better understanding that study, I think, would help inform decisions like this. But I think just intuitively, it makes sense that you'd have more density, higher, taller buildings at the street front on Evans, and then stepping down as you get into the neighborhoods. Landscaping, just like we talked about earlier, landscaping is going to be important. Connectivity, setbacks with sidewalks, all that stuff is really important. But I think that study would really help me personally answer this question, honestly.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Erika.
I basically answered this question I started with what came in second, semi-urban, and then I kind of stepped up from there, but I did rank the modern suburban last just because I think that there's just no way that'll ever be the case. So I kind of went, the 1 to 4, the 2 to 5, the 3 to 8 is kind of my rankings, because I think that, just like Councilwoman Black said, that we need to really kind of step it back and focus on limiting these enormous buildings, I think, that are able to be built on Evans, and making better use of the space that we have rather than just letting things go up, up, up.
Okay, thank you. Jared.
I'll just be the other side and say, like, I would rather have the density on Evans and have it scale back into the neighborhood than what it feels like right now is that we kind of have these big parking lots off Evans, and then the big development is like right up into the neighborhood. So I think just the future of population growth, we're going to have to find density somewhere. And it seems to be that the density on places like Evans, Leetsdale, Colorado, it seems to be the places that can afford it, and they're also built for the pedestrian and hopefully public transport of it. So from my vantage point, again, like, I think I started with that low scale urban as one, mid-scale urban. I think the modern suburban just doesn't work for what we're trying to accomplish. So I would say that that's the piece that that I would put at the bottom. So I don't know if that's just a difference of how I interpret that, or if Eric and I are actually disagreeing. If we are doing so, we're doing very politely. So thank you.
Yeah, Erika, did you want to?
Yeah, and I actually think we are kind of saying the same thing in a different way, maybe, because I see what you're saying. I do think we need to concentrate. I just think we have to make better use of that space. So rather than having like all these different weird buildings spread apart, bring them closer together, but maybe limit them from being 8 stories tall, but do something where maybe we have residential above and retail below. I think that could be a really great thing for Evans, and a great way to incorporate affordable housing potentially. The only thing is maybe with this question, how you ask it, maybe we could have something like that in there, like maybe retail on the bottom, residential above, as kind of an option for answering that question, because that would be a way that I would be more willing to go higher on that street. I don't know. Jared, does that kind of, are we kind of saying the same thing? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, I think you're both getting at the same idea. Yeah, and Erika, that is, yeah, absolutely what the idea would be. And if you remember back to the first question about the types of community benefits we want to see in exchange for growth, so we're directing more growth to Evans, that should come with community benefits like potentially affordable housing or other things like that. So yeah, these things are all related together, but I'm hearing that we need to be a little more comprehensive in the way we're asking this question, talking about transitions, talking about uses, talking about the study of the overall corridor. So this is great feedback. Jenny.
Yeah, so I actually put the modern suburban as my first option, but I didn't like the 1 to 3 story buildings. What I liked there was separated with larger landscaped areas. I am part of an RNO that has signed good neighbor agreements with developers, giving them higher zoning access to from 5 stories to 8 stories, as long as they provide better benefits to the neighborhood, such as open spaces. So I guess I would have preferred the modern suburban to be 3 to 8 stories with landscaped areas. If you want to go higher, you've got to provide more open outdoor space access, I guess, rather than having people having to go into a park to eat lunch at a picnic table. They can walk out the door and eat lunch at a picnic table. So that was my vision on that. I felt very conflicted on my answers because I didn't like my choices. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's probably not very helpful, but
No, actually that's very helpful. Like I said, you guys are being guinea pigs here as well as providing us, the specific feedback. So I think that's a good point, that maybe we need something that's a more intense version of the modern suburban, right? That higher heights potentially, but still with the more suburban layout as an option. So yeah, great points. And then that's the idea of having this opportunity to discuss it. That if folks were like, I like this aspect of this one, but this aspect of that one, we can sort of tease that out in this discussion. So very good comment. Thank you. Anything else on this one? Okay. Let's move on to the next question. So as you think about your ideal version of Evans Avenue, there are multiple sort of urban design elements that we could incorporate, but we want to understand what the priority is. What do you think is most important? Again, this is a long-term redevelopment. What should we be concentrating on getting in sooner rather than later to improve the look and feel of the corridor. So do you want wider sidewalks? Do you want more street trees? Do you want more landscape beds within the right of way, public seating, so benches along the sidewalk, cafe seating, so restaurants that have seating along the sidewalk, improved lighting and better design lighting, sort of a unique look for the Evans corridor. Public art along the corridor, trash cans or recycling bins along the sidewalks, getting rid of the overhead utilities, should that be our priority, or anything else you think of that you would like to see in the corridor. And again, I think on this one, you should get to pick your top 3. So I think maybe that's everyone who's responded. And it looks like wider sidewalks and street trees have risen to the top, with getting rid of the utility poles and lines in 3rd place. All right, anyone want to talk about their thoughts on this one? Lisa, go ahead.
Well, I don't think you can have the wide sidewalks and the street trees without removing the overhead utilities at this point. So especially that we learned from our little jaunt down Evans, which was only a couple of blocks actually. I like the idea of street trees, but I actually prioritize landscape beds. And this also is going to, be dependent upon how much space that you have. But sometimes I feel that they're, kind of create more places to stop and have a conversation or do something like that. And a lot of trees along a busy corridor like Evans it can be hard to maintain.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Anyone else want to comment on that? Anyone who selected one of the other options want to make a case for one of those? Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that it looks like just from the sampling here that the wider sidewalks has a utilitarian value that I think everybody feels like is important. And then if you look at the other popular ones are really aesthetics. And I think so landscaping and street trees and some of those things are really aesthetic. I think that's kind of what I'm feeling like, is that you need utility, you need connection with sidewalks, and then we just want it to look better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Erika.
Well, I'm not one of the few others, but I pretty much voted for wide sidewalk, street trees, and removing overhead utilities. But I'm going to reinforce my case by saying I think that street trees and removing overhead utilities, whether or not we can get rid of the ugly signage or anything else, those things make an immediate impact on beauty. And I think that it would make the street look so much nicer, even if we couldn't do anything about buildings or what kinds of businesses we had. I think it would make an immense impact on the look of the street. Not to mention, the can't remember the term, but when it's too hot because of the no trees.
Yeah, an urban heat island.
Thank you.
Yep.
So anyway.
Yeah, right. Great points. Spencer.
Yeah, so going back to what they were saying a little bit a while ago, that picking one of these sometimes necessitates one of the other ones to occur too. So, street trees would require removing overhead utilities. It sounds like, the enhanced lighting would also have that impact as well. That's why I kind of picked enhanced lighting. Was, I don't know if, just driving in the areas of the city where they've put up this new lighting, it's just very refreshing to see that in place, and mixed with the street trees and the wide sidewalks, that could really revamp Evans in general. And I picked that over removing the overhead utilities just because it sounds like that would necessitate removing the overhead utilities as well, or to some degree at least.
Yeah, definitely. There are interrelations between these. Some of them have to come first before other ones or would go together. Yeah, good point. Any other thoughts on the urban design elements? Okay. Now, finally, the missing middle question that I've been teasing since the beginning. Talking about missing middle housing, which is everything sort of between a 2-unit duplex up to 20 units in a potentially small apartment building, is what we call missing middle housing. And Blueprint Denver says every neighborhood needs to accommodate more missing middle housing, but we can have some influence over what types that is and where and when it's introduced to these neighborhoods. So we've heard from the community that folks want new housing options in the area. We need to maintain the affordability that this area has traditionally had and provide more options for residents, but we want to keep the sort of overall look and feel of these neighborhoods. People generally like their neighborhoods and don't want to see really radical change to these neighborhoods. So we need to figure out how best to incorporate these missing middle housing options into the near southeast neighborhoods so we can grow sustainably and with limited impacts. So we're asking what types of missing middle housing folks think are appropriate in their neighborhoods and where and under what circumstances they should be permitted. So the first question is thinking about your specific neighborhood, which missing middle housing options do you think could be appropriate in your neighborhood? And imagine, the best case version of each of these, right? So the best designed, the best integrated. Under the ideal circumstances, which ones do you think could be appropriate? And you can select all or any of these. So it's a duplex, obviously 2 units, a triplex or a 4plex, so getting a few more units in there, a townhouse, which is obviously side-by-side units, or small apartment buildings. These are 2, 2.5, maybe up to 3-story apartment buildings. So not the big, not something like the Deco, but something that has a much smaller footprint and is more in scale with the existing neighborhoods worked in there. Spencer, do you have a question, or is that just still up from?
That's just still up, my bad.
No problem. All right. So that everyone maybe close to it. So it looks like duplex rose to the top. Well, it looks like everybody said a duplex would be appropriate. A townhouse not far behind. And then the 3plex or 4plex and small apartment buildings trailing. So anyone want to talk about why they think certain choices would or would not be appropriate in their neighborhoods? Now, we talked a little bit about this in some previous questions. So yeah, go ahead, Erika.
I feel like we have a lot of apartment buildings. And I think that the main component we're missing is, duplexes, townhomes, really small, multiple unit dwellings. We have a lot of large apartment complexes throughout. Not that we couldn't do more, but in the mix of the actual single family home neighborhoods, I think that would be the most appropriate way to increase options.
Okay, thanks, Erika. Adrian.
Hey, Yeah, I agree. It's kind of one of the conversations earlier that touched on Cap Hill and its density, and then obviously as we become more of a suburban center down this way, obviously the kind of the duplexes are the best way. We've seen some of these lots get scraped, and two go in instead of the single for that. It's obviously trying to do the best we can to thread the needle of getting the density, but also making sure we're not the Cap Hill Center where we've got tons of infrastructure for 20 coffee shops and 20 different places for markets and delis. We just don't have that. So as you get closer to that kind of small apartments and the multiplexes, I just don't think that that's what Virginia Village is. But I do agree that we got to figure out a way to do density. And I think kind of that duplex route is probably the best way to do it, to kind of keep our identity but add density.
Okay, great, thanks. Jared.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was a part of a Habitat for Humanity build off I-25 in Colorado several years ago, right there behind the Best Buy. And it was semi-attached homes. I think that they would have been categorized as townhomes or duplexes. When we were building them 4 at a time that were kind of sharing external walls. And it feels like, obviously Habitat has been doing the affordable housing thing for a while. And, they're tastefully kind of worked into the neighborhood. I think we ended up building 25 or 30 homes, on the lot there. So it feels like it kind of meets a couple of the marks, both of affordable housing, density, and still keeping kind of the aesthetic of the neighborhood.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Lisa, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say something really quick. So I try to drive around, and I think I'm talking about the Goldsmith area that is just south of George Washington. Is that kind of east of Monaco? Is that area, or what is that area? Or is that in our plan? I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, that would be more Virginia Village area.
Yeah, yeah. So the north part.
Yeah.
But some of the,
I think you're talking maybe Washington, Virginia Vale.
well, yes, the Virginia Vale, I think is what I'm talking about. So you can see that there's starting to be some scrapes going on there along on the other side of the park. And so I guess I would, because parkland, always, if you look at Bible Park, if you look at Eisenhower Park, it always seems to have the streets that front it and turn into mini mansions. So when we talk about housing options of increasing our density, what might we do with some of these smaller bungalows that will keep them from just going the way other neighborhoods have gone, with bigger houses and a bigger footprint and a violation of the bulk plane and dark streets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are a few ways we can tackle things like that, or a few tools we can use in combination to tackle things like that. So one of the things we've recommended in the past in the East Colfax neighborhood, so this isn't near parks, but it's a similar issue where we have a lot of smaller houses on relatively larger lots with fairly permissive zoning. And so we were just starting to see some of these small lots or small houses get torn down and developed into these much larger houses that are inconsistent with the community, but they're now very expensive single family houses. And so what we recommended was that, if you want to have a single family house, it has to stay fairly small. If you want to go bigger and sort of utilize the whole building envelope allowed by the zoning, you have to incorporate more units and incorporate affordability. So we make sure that if things do get bigger, we're also getting more units out of it and some affordability instead of, as you were talking about, tearing down these small bungalows and just putting in mini mansions. So there are tools we can use to address that, to discourage that, or try to regulate that. And then the next question will sort of get into that as well, of what are the circumstances where we want to see those types of things or these types of missing middle development. So great point. And yeah, there are a lot of issues that sort of overlap and feed into each other that we need to keep track of. I didn't see who was first, but Jenny's on top, so we'll go with Jenny.
So in University Hills North, we are experiencing a lot of development along the Evans corridor between Evans and Iliff. And there's some single family zoning there, but in the areas that there's not single family zoning, that's where we need to step down from those taller buildings from Evans. And the smaller apartments, I think, are a great option. In that neighborhood, we have some small apartment buildings in our neighborhood as it is, and they're not disruptive. I love the fact that they're there. We have a lot of townhomes that have gone in. What are they, like those 3.5-story townhomes? I would love to see more duplex. I selected all 4 of those, particularly for my neighborhood, because there are areas in my neighborhood where it's appropriate, and it's great to have such a mix of housing in areas where it's acceptable, like from Evans to Iliff, where all that development is happening. And I hope that when it's all done, there is going to be a mix of all of those different types of housing. So when we're talking about stepping down from those big corridors, Colorado Boulevard and Evans, I feel like we need all of them.
Yeah, that's great points. And yeah, this question, when we do it in the community workshop, as I said, will be sort of in neighborhood specific breakout groups. And when we ask this in the online survey, it'll be tied to your neighborhood. So yeah, University Hills North may have different needs or expectations than other neighborhoods. And so we can tease out something that may be appropriate in University Hills North is not appropriate in Virginia Village, maybe it is, but that's why we want to hear from the community. So thanks, Jenny. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I just was surprised to not see ADUs thrown in with this particular option. I just look forward to that discussion because we have so many different types of neighborhoods in the planning area that have different needs. So will we be seeing that in another question, or did I miss?
Yeah, that's a good point. And yes, that was a conscious choice to leave it out of this question.
Okay.
We're going to have it in a different question. As I think you're aware, our citywide guidance in Blueprint is to eventually allow ADUs everywhere in the city. So it's not really a question of, is it appropriate in your neighborhood? We've said we want to allow it everywhere. We know there are certain design issues that differ by neighborhood. Most of near Southeast doesn't have alleys, so we have that different design issues with ADUs, detached ADUs that don't have alleys. I think also, as you're aware, we're launching a project to look at those design issues and other things. So we're sort of looking at that as a citywide level. So we didn't want to get into too much detail and step on those toes. Well, the question we're planning to ask is about which neighborhoods would like to see ADUs sooner rather than later, right? Eventually we want it everywhere, but we're not going to just blanket introduce them. We're sort of doing it neighborhood by neighborhood. There have been a few neighborhoods in the last year that we've done sort of neighborhood-wide ADU allowances. So are there any neighborhoods within your Southeast that want that? And then we could work towards introducing ADUs sooner there than elsewhere.
I think the reason I would have liked it included in this question, especially if it's going to be asked at the open community meeting, is because of the fact that Blueprint holds ADUs up as a value, but the city is not zoned that way. We still, by and large, leave it up to the individual homeowner.
Yep.
So if we're leaning if we want to gather information on community preference, I think it would be an appropriate place to include that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you, sir. I only bring you good points, this guy.
That's true. We appreciate it. Erika.
Kind of bouncing off of what Jenny had to say, is there a way to kind of break out that question into two different parts? And because I would probably answer it a little differently, but I hear what Jenny said, and in certain areas, especially at the step down closest to Evans or Iliff, I would feel really good about all of the options. But then, you know, in my little chunk of neighborhood where we have all single family homes with nothing else at this point, I would feel maybe more comfortable with just duplexes in addition to my home. So I don't know if we could kind of say, like, if you live in a, you know, within a few blocks of a larger street, how would you feel about these options? And then if you don't live within a few blocks of a major street, how would you feel about these options? I think you could get completely different responses.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we'll get into that a little bit in the next question. So the way we were thinking about this is that this question is there any place in your neighborhood that you think these could be appropriate? And then in later questions, we'll sort of tease out what are the appropriate locations for whatever you thought was appropriate somewhere in your neighborhood.
I just keep trying to jump ahead, Scott.
No, and it's a good point, because that's the way people think, right? You're thinking perfectly logically that, well, that might be appropriate, you know, a few blocks over, but when I think about my immediate neighborhood, maybe it's not appropriate. And so we want to be clear about what we're asking, and so these kind of comments help us sort of refine these questions so that we don't mislead people or confuse people. So great comment. Thank you for bringing that up. We will try to improve these questions so that it addresses those concerns. Councilman, you have another comment, or is your hand just still up? Okay. All right, anything else on this one before I move to the next question? Okay. All right, so this is the question of under what circumstances should whichever options you chose in the last one be permitted in your neighborhood? And I've realized as we were talking about this, there's not really a broader location option, like, you know, around the edges or near larger streets. Or I guess we do have along larger streets, but I was thinking, you know, as that sort of transition option that Jenny was talking about. So I think we'll add that as one of those options here. If that's your choice, you can select other. But the idea is, you know, is it on corner lots? Is it on larger lots? If anybody has a larger lot, that's where that's appropriate. Is it along the larger streets like the collectors or the heavier traffic streets? Is it sort of anywhere as long as the new units will be affordable or reserved for other uses? Is it, as we were talking about, where someone will preserve the existing house? So they'll keep the existing house, but they can add another unit or two behind that. Is it, you know, everywhere? Do you think anywhere in my neighborhood is appropriate for duplexes or for whatever choices you made on the first one? Or again, some other option, be that as a transition area or something else we're not thinking of. Okay. It's like along larger streets, although quite a few on larger lots and everywhere. I'm kind of surprised about how many folks said everywhere. That's interesting. So anyone want to talk about their thinking on why, you know, again, we talked about this a little bit in the last question, but why they think certain locations or certain circumstances, scenarios are appropriate for these kinds of housing versus others? Lisa, thanks.
I picked everywhere because I live in a duplex neighborhood, so, and with townhomes in different kind of styles, some kind of row homes, some kind of more of a suburban townhome setting with more landscaping, and then, you know, just a bunch of duplexes. So I think duplex living is very compatible with single family homes. When we talked about that, or a small townhome with three plexes. I did a lot of work with a developer who just did a lot of rehabs to houses in Capitol Hill and just all over the city when they were being bought up during the financial crisis. And we worked on a lot of triplexes and duplexes, and they weren't really expensive, and they really did create some good affordable housing. They had good bones. They needed a lot of work. And so, and then these were interspersed definitely in areas that had single family homes as well.
Okay, sounds good, thanks. Anyone else? Okay, we've got one more question. So if no one else has anything on this, we'll go ahead and go to the last one. So still thinking about missing middle housing. We know there are trade-offs to allowing this kind of housing. Obviously, there are benefits. That's why we're encouraging this. But there could be impacts on the community. So we want to understand what impacts or trade-offs folks are most concerned about with these, and we want to make sure that we limit or mitigate as this type of housing comes in. So are folks most concerned about maintaining yard space so that, you know, these new missing middle housing options don't take up the entire lot, that we still have yards? Are you concerned about sort of the appearance of the size, that you don't want them to look too big from the street, from the sidewalk? Are you concerned about parking, that adding new units will impact parking? Concerned about design issues, that they won't fit in design wise with the neighborhood. You want to make sure that they fit in better. Are you concerned about shadow impacts on neighboring properties, that potentially taller buildings or bulkier buildings could cast shadows on neighboring properties? Are you concerned about prices, that, you know, potentially as allowing this redevelopment, allowing additional uses on properties could drive up prices in the neighborhood? Are you concerned about displacement, again, as properties potentially redevelop, folks getting forced out of the neighborhood? Or is there anything else we're not thinking of that you're concerned about? Again, I think this one has a 3-choice limit. So if you tell us your top 3 among these. All right, looks like design has risen to the top with keeping prices lower in second place there. But looks like a few votes for pretty much everything, at least. So anyone want to talk about their concerns about the impacts or trade-offs with missing metal and what they'd like to see regulations and recommendations address?
I would just quickly say that when you do ask this question, instead of saying which is the most important to you, put it like you just said it to us, which is the biggest concern to you? Because I think the way it's actually written is more confusing than what you said.
Okay, thanks. Jared.
Yeah, I think the maintaining yard space is kind of confusing to me, unless we're thinking like, I don't know how you add it to properties and maintain the yard. I think actually being in this neighborhood, one of the vantage points is that they are larger lots. So as you're thinking about duplexes or even ADUs, I think you can add to the lot. But it would seem to be, maybe I just read that wrong, but like the yard size, I'm always interested in decreasing the size of my yard, mostly because of my Denver water bill. So that's maybe I'm just reading something wrong there.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, when I say yard, it's not necessarily grass space, but sort of non-developed space, pervious surface, right? Whether it's landscape beds or turf or anything that's not sort of house and pavement. But yeah, right. If you're not as concerned about maintaining the appearance of relatively large yards in houses, then that's certainly an option, right? So, but yeah, we can try to clarify what we mean by that in that option. Scott.
So I guess, I don't know if anyone else had this experience when responding, but I was having trouble, I guess, parsing out the impact of these things specifically from missing middle housing versus any new development. Because as we were talking about some of those like older homes getting scraped in favor of larger format, big homes that take up the whole lot, I was having trouble like distinguishing in my brain the difference between that and missing middle specifically.
Yeah, that's a great point. That a lot of these impacts would be the same, whether it's a house being scraped for a duplex or triplex or just a larger single family house. So maybe it's more, maybe it's not, maybe we shouldn't ask this tied specifically to missing middle, but should just ask it about as new development comes in, what are you concerned about in your neighborhood? That's a great point. Spencer.
So I'm the only person that selected other apparently. But I think for me, a lot of these encompass what I was thinking, but we've heard from a lot of people that, they want to keep the feel of the neighborhoods. And, that was kind of when I was thinking the other, it's like the impact it would have on the overall, I guess, environment of that neighborhood.
Yeah.
The overall feel, the overall not culture, but the overall just atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. We're sort of trying to break that down into.
Yeah, that's what that's what I'm saying. Like all these kind of encompass that. It's right. Just like I selected other because it goes into that.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and yeah, we'll give that some thought. And yeah, right. That if it's a little bit of everything, it's really just the overall feel that you're concerned about. That I think selecting other for that is perfectly valid.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we got about 5 minutes left here. So like I said, this was the last question, but what I'd like to do with the last 5 minutes, unless Councilman Cashman has something, is sort of talking about this format. So let me go to Councilman Cashman and then we can circle back to.
Yeah, sorry to dive in again, but it's relevant in that to me, we're talking a lot about trying to maintain the feel of the community and the nature of the community. And I know in my neighborhood, Virginia Village, one of the things that I've loved about it, as long as I've lived here, is it's not among Denver's ultra expensive neighborhoods. It's not a Bonnie Bray, a Wash Park, a University Park. And so I think one of the most important things we can try to do is to maintain the affordability of the community. However that gets done, and it is awfully tricky in a world where people's wealth is so dependent on the value of their home. But I didn't want this part of the discussion to go without throwing that in. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And great point. Yeah, that's, that's why that's one of the options, because yeah, we think that's important, and we expect members of the community to feel that way as well. All right, great. So as I said, I want to spend the last few minutes here just sort of, if anyone had any comments on how you thought this exercise, this format worked. We've talked a little bit as we went through about some tweaks to these questions to improve them, but sort of overall, did you like this format? Did you think the survey questions helped sort of guide the discussion? Any improvements you'd recommend? Any ideas? Spencer and Councilman, you still have your hands up. Is that new comments or old?
Old.
Okay. No problem.
Favorite question was the one where the sidewalk, like that one was really clear question and really visually able to figure out kind of where the votes went. Maybe it's just because I like the dots rather than bar graphs, but that one felt the most directed and directive question, that it felt like there was some real tangible impacts to be able to respond to. So I don't know who's creating the questions and how that all forms out, but that one felt like the clearest distinctive.
Okay, yeah, great. That's good feedback. Yeah, I'm basically writing the questions, so any feedback is good. And yeah, this dot format is one of the responses. The ranking ones go the way they are, but we could, all the ones that were sort of the bar chart, like this one, could also be dots. That's one of the options in the software. So if you like the dots better, we can do dots more than bar chart response. Anything else? Okay. So we are almost at 8 o'clock. So we might actually end on time tonight. Thanks everyone for participating. I think this was really good discussion and really good help for us in sort of refining this exercise. So really appreciate all your participation and comments. Like I said, we are looking to sort of launch this towards the end of February. So we will be sending out information about that like in the past. Really appreciate if you could sort of spread that among your networks, tell your neighbors, tell your friends that they should come to the community workshop, take the online survey, participate in the plan. So we'll give you all the information you need to tell everyone. And then, as we talked about at the beginning, if you have any thoughts about who would make a good community navigator, or what groups we should be reaching out to try to find community navigators, we would really appreciate any help you could give us or any guidance on that. So please send me an email with any thoughts you have, even if it's, I don't know if this is a good idea. If you think of it, send it to us, because we're taking all ideas. So with that, it is now 8 o'clock. We can go ahead and end. Thanks everyone, and we will see you all in February for our next steering committee meeting.
Take care, everyone.